Lesson 9.6, the final lesson in this unit, is on the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is another way to solve quadratic equations. And what's nice about the quadratic formula is that it always works. Okay, so some of the other methods that we used to solve quadratics prior to this, sometimes they don't always work and we're not able to use them, but the quadratic formula always works. So when in doubt, use this. As a warm-up, we want to evaluate b squared minus 4ac for the given values, so let's do that. This b squared minus 4ac, as we see down here, is called the discriminant, and you will see this in the quadratic formula. So let's warm up evaluating this expression. So we know that our b is 3. Well, let's see here. B squared minus 4ac. Let's do that first. So our b is 3. Substitute in. So 3 squared minus 4 times my a is 1. And then your c is 4. So 3 squared, that's going to give us 9. And then we have a negative 4 times 1. That's negative 4. And then a negative 4 times 4. That's a negative 16. Alright, so our answer is going to be negative 7. Alright, for the second one, same thing, substitute in, and make sure when we substitute a negative in, you're always using parentheses. So I'm going to put negative 5 in parentheses and then square it. If you don't use those parentheses, you're not going to get the right answer. And then minus 4 times, actually, b squared is, our b is negative 2. Made a mistake there. Alright, so we have negative 2 squared minus 4 times negative 5 times 6. So a negative 2 squared, that's going to be a positive 4. And then we have a negative 4 times a negative 5, that's a positive 20. And then we have a positive 20 times 6, that's going to give us 120. So 124 is your answer. Okay. Alright, so this brings us to the next thing, the discriminant. That's the b squared minus 4ac. It's used to find how many zeros a quadratic equation has. It can also be used to determine if the quadratic equation is factorable. Alright, there's 3 different cases. If b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, so in this case it was, then the quadratic equation will have 2 zeros. If the value is also a perfect square, then the quadratic equation can be solved using factoring. If b squared minus 4ac equals 0, which none of these 2 cases shows, but if it did, then the quadratic equation has just 1 zero. And if b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, which it is here, then there are no zeros for the quadratic equation. There will be no real zeros. You're going to get imaginary answers. Okay. Okay, so when a quadratic equation is not factorable, you can find the zeros by graphing, completing the square, or using the quadratic formula. Graphing and using the quadratic formula are the most common. Alright, and here it is. Here is the quadratic formula. You've probably seen this before. You have to commit this to memory. It's x equaling negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That needs to be memorized. In problem 1, determine whether each quadratic equation is factorable. If it is, then solve by factoring and using the quadratic formula. So we're going to solve this two ways, if we can. Okay, so we look at our equation, x squared minus 2x minus 8, and let's write in our a, b, and c. Our a is going to be 1, our b is negative 2, and our c is negative 8. From there we're going to find b squared minus 4ac. Let's evaluate that. So negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 8. Negative 2 squared is going to give us 4. And then we have a negative 4 times 1, which is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 8 is a positive 32. So that's 36. Alright, remember what we set up above, that this equation is going to be factorable because 36 is a perfect square. Alright, so we should be able to factor this. Alright, so let's do that first. Remember, when we're factoring, we want factors of a times c that sum to b. So our a times c, 1 times negative 8 is negative 8, and it has to sum to negative 2. Alright, factors of 8, 1 and 8, 2 and 4. Remember, we want factors of negative 8, so that means I'm going to need one positive and one negative. But they have to sum to negative 2. So I got to make this 4 negative down here. So there's the combination I'm going to be working with. Now, what do I do with those? I put them over your a. So I'm going to write 2 over 1 and negative 4 over 1. Okay, so when I factor this, I have 1x, remember you pair that bottom number with an x, so 1x plus 2 times 1x minus 4. That equals 0. So this became this. Now we set both factors equal to 0 and solve. So we have x plus 2 equaling 0 and x minus 4 equaling 0. Subtract 2 from both sides, so x equals negative 2. And x equals a positive 4. Alright. Now let's solve using the quadratic formula. So we know that x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Alright, so we have a negative b, so a negative, and then your b is negative 2. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Well, we already calculated what b squared minus 4ac was. It was 36. All over 2 times 1. So negative 1 times negative 2 gives me 2. So we have 2 plus or minus the square root of 36 is 6 all over 2. Alright, now we're going to divide both terms 2 and 6 by 2. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. So we have x equals 1 plus or minus, and then 6 divided by 2 is 3. So the equations we have, x equals 1 plus 3 and x equals 1 minus 3. So that will yield answers of x equaling 4 and x equaling -2. Okay, we get the same answers using the quadratic formula as we did factoring. Alright, for letter B, we have x squared minus 4x minus 21. Again, we're going to do the same thing, see if we can solve this factoring and using the quadratic formula. Let's write down our A, B, and C first. So your A is 1, your B is -4, and your C is -21. So let's plug that in to the discriminant. So we have B squared minus 4 times 1 times -21. So -4 squared is 16. And then we have a -4 times 1, so that's -4, times the -21. That's going to give us a positive 84. And when you add those together, you're going to get 100. Alright, so 100 is greater than 0, so that's telling us that we're going to have two solutions and that we're going to be able to factor this because 100 is a perfect square. So let's factor. So we're looking for factors of A times C, that's sum to B. So fact A times C, so -21, that's sum to -4. Factors of 21, 1 and 21, 3 and 7. We want factors of -21, so that means one has to be positive, one has to be negative. So I got to make that 7 negative in order to get a sum of -4. So we write 3 over our A, which is 1, and -7 over our A, which is 1. And now we're ready to put in factored form. We pair that 1 with an x, so 1x plus 3, and then 1x minus 7, and that equals 0. And then set both factors equal to 0 and solve. So x plus 3 equals 0, x minus 7 equals 0. Subtract 3 from both sides, so x equals -3. Add 7 to both sides, x equals 7. Okay, let's now use the quadratic formula to solve. So -b, so we write our negative, and then our b is -4. And then we have b squared, so -4 squared what am I doing? We know this already. The discriminant, guys, is 100. So plus or minus the square root of 100 all over 2 times 1. So -1 times -4 is a positive 4. Plus or minus the square root of 100 is 10 all over 2. Now we're going to divide 4 by 2. That's going to give us 2. we have x equals 2 plus or minus, and then 10 divided by 2, which is 5. So we have x equaling 2 plus 5, and x equaling 2 minus 5. So x equals 7, and x equals negative 3. Okay, so we get the same solutions doing it both ways. So we have 2, and this confirms, remember the discriminant was greater than 0, so that would indicate 2 real solutions, which we have here. Alright, the last one we're going to do together is C. So we have 5x squared plus 12x minus 2. So let's write our A, B, and C in. So our A is 5, our B is 12, and our C is negative 2. B squared minus 4AC. So (12 squared minus 4 times 5 times negative 2). And when you put that in the calculator, you're going to get 184. Alright, so that's greater than 0, so we should get 2 solutions. However, we may not be able to factor this. It's not a perfect square. Alright, so let's just check. So we're looking for factors of A times C that sum to B. So A times C, 5 and negative 2. That's going to give us a negative 10. So factors of negative 10 that sum to 12. So factors of 10, 1 and 10, 2 and 5. One's got to be positive, one has to be negative. Just not going to be able to get there. So if I make the 1 negative and the 10 positive, that gives me a positive 9. I'm not going to be able to get to 12. So you cannot, so this would be not factorable. Okay? Because it's not factorable doesn't mean you still can't solve the equations. Okay, again, you just have to either graph it on your graphing calculator or use the quadratic formula, which we'll do right now. So we have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So x equals negative b, so negative times 12 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that was 184 all over 2 times 5, which is 10. So we have x equals negative 12 plus or minus. Now the square root of 184, we're going to have to put that in the calculator. That's approximately 13.56. And then divide by 10. Okay. Alright, so we're going to have two equations. And so we're going to have one that's negative 12 plus 13.56 divided by 10, and x equaling, I need more room, put it over here, x equals negative 12 minus 13.56 divided by 10. Alright, so we're going to enter these into the calculator. So negative 12 minus 13.56 divided by 2. Sorry, I think I misspoke there. We need to divide by 10. So when we do that, we get x is approximately, because we rounded, negative 2.56. And then we're going to do negative 12 plus 13.56 divided by 10. So x is approximately 0.16. Okay, so this last example, we saw the usefulness of the quadratic formula. We couldn't solve this by factoring. It was not factorable. So when that happens, you can either graph it or use the quadratic formula, because those will always work. Alright, so this wraps up lesson 9.6 on the quadratic formula.